This shows the approximate size of a single Oregon pioneer land claim. 640 acres. Even hearing the number doesn't make it clear. 640 acres sounds big, but it's hard to picture. Here's a simple way to understand it. 1 acre is about the size of a football field. A single field, end zone to end zone. Now imagine that same field repeated again and again and again. 640 times. Laid out together, that becomes a perfect square, 1 mile by 1 mile. What settlers received wasn't just a farm. It was an entire landscape. And most families were expected to live on it, work it, and make it productive with just their own labor. But even with all that land, the real challenge hadn't started yet. That square mile might feel abstract. So here's what it looked like in real life. In 1851, a man named Americus Savage traveled west on the Oregon Trail with his wife and children, chasing the promise of free land under the Donation Land Claim Act. After months on the trail, and even stopping along the way for the birth of a child, his family reached the Willamette Valley and chose a piece of land along the Calapooia River. That land claim became their home. They built a cabin, cleared fields, started farming, and like many families, they weren't working just a small plot. They were living on hundreds of acres. Years later, a small portion of that same land was sold off and used to build what became Thompson's mills. What started as one family's land claim turned into a working mill, a small town, and a center of local life. At its peak, the town around the mill had a post office, a school, and dozens of families. But like many early settlements, it didn't last. When a railroad was built a few miles away, bypassing the town, people moved away, buildings were relocated, and the town disappeared. Today, the mill still stands. But the rest of that community is gone, and stories like this were happening all across the valley. In the 1850s, the federal government offered 640 acres of land for free. But there was a condition. You had to travel more than 2,000 miles to get there and survive long enough to keep it. That promise helped drive thousands of people west on the Oregon Trail, not just for adventure, but for land on a scale most people had never even imagined. But here's what makes this story interesting. Why was this much land being given away in the first place? And how did a system like this actually work in practice? This didn't begin with the federal government. It started long before the law was ever written. Here you'll find hidden stories of the Willamette Valley, its people, its places, and its history. If you find this worthwhile, please subscribe and like this video. Joining the channel helps support future work, and your comments help guide what comes next. In the early 1840s, settlers in the Oregon Territory were already dividing up land on their own. They weren't waiting for permission. They were building farms, setting boundaries, and claiming land simply by occupying it and improving it. And by the time the federal government stepped in, much of the best farmland in the Willamette Valley was already spoken for. In 1850, that informal system became law. The Donation Land Claim Act took those early claims and turned them into legal ownership. It also expanded the system and set clear rules for who qualified and how much land they could receive. The name explains how it worked. Donation meant the land was being given, not sold. Claim meant you still had to prove you deserved it. You had to choose the land, live on it, work it, and stay there long enough to earn ownership. It was not instant wealth. It was an opportunity with conditions. That generous offer didn't last long. As more people arrived, the government scaled it back. Settlers who arrived later received half as much land. Then in just a few years, the free land deal ended entirely. This created a clear divide between those who arrived early and those who came later. There's something about this story that seems strange at first. These settlers were traveling through land that we now know is some of the best farmland in North America. And they kept going. The reason comes down to opportunity. Land in places like Nebraska and Kansas wasn't free. It had to be purchased, even if the price was relatively low. Oregon offered more land, and in many cases, no upfront cost. There were practical reasons too. The Great Plains were drier and harder to farm, with the tools available at the time. Oregon's Willamette Valley had a reputation for reliable rainfall and fertile soil. So even though they were passing through valuable land, many settlers kept moving. At the time, Oregon simply looked like the better deal. The land being claimed was not empty. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples had lived on and managed these landscapes. Then in just a few years, millions of acres were claimed and divided into private property. Land that had once been shared became fenced and restricted. Food sources were disrupted. Entire communities were forced off their land. Some later returned as laborers, working on land they had once called home. This reshaped the Willamette Valley in ways that are still felt today. The transformation happened fast. Open land became farms. Trails became roads. Temporary camps became permanent towns. The entire region shifted from a shared landscape to one defined by ownership and boundaries. And once that system was in place, it didn't go away. It became the foundation for everything that followed. The impact of these land claims never really disappeared. The next time you drive through the Willamette Valley and see fields divided into clean lines with farms spread across the landscape, you're looking at decisions made in the 1850s. In a way, the Oregon Trail didn't really end. It became part of the land.